Hi folks, welcome to the stream. I'm sorry if my voice is a bit muffled, but I'm going to be working with some fumey chemicals today for today's little lesson. And I would like to kind of protect my lungs. I'm using the lesser of my respirators because it's honestly not that bad of a chemical. It just stinks to high heavens and is probably not that great to breathe in, but it's better than a lot of the other stuff I use. So today's a little lessony tip thing stream is going to be going over seam welding. When you're building a model kit, there will inevitably be parts where you're going to find seam lines where you don't quite want to have them be present for when you're painting, such as along the backpack here. There's one. Goof and Zaku legs are notorious for having them at the bottom of the leg skirt and on the shoulder pads here. It's a little difficult to get into the camera, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about, I think. So, for this technique, I'm going to be using a chemical called Mr. Dissolved Putty. It is, as it says, a dissolved putty. You brush this into an area wherever you see a seam line. Let's see if I can get that close, see if it will focus, kinda, maybe, sorta, not really, no. Come on, autofocus, don't be like this. There we go. Okay, so you can see that seam line running up the side of the leg there. It's not very attractive. So, you take your Mr. Dissolved Putty. The cap will often stay on it partially, so you just pull that off. Enjoy the wonderful smell. And you're going to use a brush that you don't care about because you're not going to be able to save it afterwards. Just take a little bit of brush load of it, and you're going to end up turning the autofocus on the camera back on so it will maybe actually work. And you're going to just brush that into the seam itself. You can also use this on minor imperfections in, say, a resin cast or just on the surface of plastic from where maybe you scratched it with a hobby knife or you couldn't quite get a nub clean. This will flow into the recesses a bit, and as it hardens, it will shrink and fill in that gap pretty nicely. There are occasions where you will need to use more than one coat to get the gap completely closed, but you'll have to wait for it to really dry before you can tell. It will dry pretty quickly, like 10 to 20 minutes quickly, and then at which point you can either add more to it or you'll want to sand it. Now I've got one that I did before the show that you can see here. It is mostly smooth now. I'm going to go ahead and give this another coat just in case. Once it is dry, you'll want to sand the piece to get it completely smooth. And then you are safe to prime it and paint it. Now this is a technique that you will need to paint afterwards because you will not get this, well, it does fade the color of the putty. It will not fade back to the plastic color, so you will need to paint over it after you're done. So let's also go ahead and take a look at the Goof's shoulder pad here. Just pull it off the socket and everything. So I don't really necessarily want to feel that seam there, but I do want to get right here where it's running along the side of the panel. So I'm just, again, just brush it on. Try not to put too much on as I'm smearing it all over the place here. exciting times watching putty dry. For situations like this shoulder pad where the seam isn't honestly too gappy or anything, a thin coat will usually do it. Just a single thin coat. Uh, the problem with it, though, is that you can't always tell if you've done a good enough job cleaning it up until you've primed the piece. At which point you will need to, if you want to attempt to fix it more, sand it and re-putty. Otherwise, you're going to end up with what will look like a panel line there when you go to paint it and wash it. And if you do end up accidentally erasing a panel line that you want to have with this, then you can take your hobby knife and just scrape through that to get it. Let's see. For overly removed nubs, is the technique any different from frame lines? Uh, Not particularly. I've got a bit of a nub on the foot here that I can show off. Let me go ahead and take his legs off completely. Good old high grades. Alright, so I've got a portion of the foot here where I did a little bit too much gouging with my hobby knife to get the nubs on the feet done. I will just apply a small amount of it onto the surface, brush it on like usual, and then yeah, just sand it off later, and it will smooth in to that hole, and it should look pretty good. Now, like on the back of the leg here, let's see if I can get. Come on, focus, focus. I've got this big panel line here that I want to keep, but I don't want the one down here on the skirt, so I'm just going to focus the putty down there and try to not get it into that actual panel line. For this, I am also going to do it on both sides, just to try to smooth it out a little bit more. It's not necessary to do it on the inside because you're probably never going to see that, but it can help it a little bit just to maintain consistency. And then the other foot as well. Just let those dry for a bit. Check on the leg over here. Give it another little bit. Gunpla model has pretty bad lines all over it from where the parts connect. And it's supposed to be mostly smooth surfaces, so this will be a bit of work. Which is also why I did most of it off stream beforehand, so I can focus on the next steps with it. I'm going to go ahead and seal this, get that fumy smell the hell out of here for a little bit. Toss that brush in the trash because it is gone. Alright, so I have a piece from Fumina that I was working on earlier that I've done a Mr. Dissolve putty onto. It's dry now. As you can see, there's the sheen parts for the parts where I didn't get putty, and then the matte parts where there are. So I'm going to go ahead and take my sandpaper. I've got several different grades, and I'll just sand it a bit to clean it up. You'll want to make sure you work from a lower number to a higher number to get this as smooth and clean as possible. I will probably need to actually buy more sandpaper soon, it looks like. What sandpaper am I using? These are little foam strips of sandpaper from Godhand, the same company that makes the clippers I use. These are actually pretty cheap, like 400 yen for the pack, and I would actually recommend them over traditional sandpaper because they're easy to hold. You can flex them into different shapes to get them wherever you need them to, and they work really well. And it's a pack that comes with 4,000, 6,000, 8,000, and 10,000 little strips. One thing I'm doing here is I'm rubbing my nail against the seam. It's a little bit of a way that you can tell if the technique has worked completely for you. And I can tell here that when I rub my nail across the seam, I can still feel it catch, which will tell you that there is still a gap there and it needs a bit more putty. So I'm going to go ahead and put that aside for right now. And I will grab one of the legs and see how I do with this. They aren't really sound enough to do nubs just straight off the part. You're going to want to use either a hobby knife or a file to get those initially clean, and then just clean it up with sandpaper or Mr. Putty and sandpaper, or however else you want to clean it up. Files are generally going to be around 200 and to 300 grit, so they're going to be very rough on the surface. And you'll want to get some sandpaper to clean that up afterwards. I generally clip and then use a hobby knife to clean up the knobs as best I can, and go from there. And so this has resulted in a mostly sealed surface. I will need to do a little bit more touch up and more sanding to get it smooth, but it did at least fill up most of the gaps in this initial pass of it. Uh, this is not a quick process, even though the putty does dry quickly, and it's a bit of trial and error uh, that will take several attempts, most likely, to get everything exactly right. unfortunately, this sandpaper appears to no longer be good. So I can't sand it anymore today. It seems like it's a good thing I'm going to a hobby shop tomorrow. Okay. So I mean, that is the technique. Put some putty on it, brush it on, sand it off, fix your seams. If you can feel it with your nail, then you put some more putty on and sand it some more, smooth it out again. And then once you get a nice smooth transition of your fingernail across the surface, you know that it's nice and smooth and you're safe to prime it, paint it, and display it. Uh, any other questions from the audience? Alright, well, I'm going to go ahead and cut the stream short then, since I need to go get supplies apparently. Uh, Make sure to hit follow for any future broadcasts to get the first notification, and come back Monday at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 5:30 p.m. Pacific Time for the Monday night Isekai Heavy Industries Gunpla stream, where I will be joined by Tom, and we'll see, what do I recommend for higher grade files? Sandpaper. Um, they unfortunately don't make files usually in the thousands grade, so you'll want to get sandpaper for that, unfortunately. Tamiya files are generally pretty good. Uh, they have nice grips on them. They've got a decent grit to them as well. You can get cheap ones from Harbor Freight, but they are prone to breakage and are incredibly rough for the most part. Uh, but Tamiya does a really nice little set of files that I don't have conveniently here to pull off and show to you. Uh, but yeah, they have a nice grip, they feel good in your hand, and they don't leave too much of a mark for a file. So yeah, I'll be back Monday then with Tom. We'll have our fun Monday hangout as usual, and hopefully I'll actually be able to get something done then. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit follow. Make sure to tell your friends to hit follow. And I will see you Monday.